Okay, recommendation number 11. The department is recommending against this, or this is our recommendation. Do not require hosting platforms to report quarterly to the planning department the number of nights the residential unit was occupied as a short-term residential rental, which is in the Campos ordinance. And the department is recommending against this because basically not all, as we heard from Mr. Owen, not all short-term rental programs are set up the same way. They don't always handle the transaction. Places like VRBO and Craigslist don't take the money and they don't handle the booking. So the information we would get would be incomplete.
Commissioner Richards.
This question I have is, it was on the prior legislation recommendation that I was not on the commission. I think it, can somebody help me on that? So why didn't this come up before?
It did come up before. I think we proposed it, and it was not integrated. The commission voted for it. It was not put into the final ordinance, primarily because of this reason, I believe. So,
if I may, I think it's worth spending a moment on this, even at the hour, because Supervisor Campos was clearly quite concerned about this recommendation. With the department's recommendations were really a whole suite of actions, right? The making consistent unhosted and hosted, and removing that distinction, requiring the hosting platform to have the registration number. And with those recommendations, we felt the data was frankly less critical if those were to go forward, combined with the fact that the concerns about privacy issues as well as concerns about the inconsistency of the data, because some of the platforms don't get involved in the transaction at all. So the combination of all that was why we have suggested that it not be a requirement. And it's not to say the data wouldn't be helpful, but to make it a requirement seems to us to not necessarily be needed at this point if the other actions go into place. Further, it does seem like the proposals that the department made in the past was not necessarily that the data be required, but that we get the data somehow. There may be other technologies, web scraping services that we can use. But given the fact that the hosting platforms don't all collect the data, and it seems as if there's some shifting in platforms, rightly or wrongly, that's what's being said, it seemed like it would be inconsistent to get the data from the actual platforms themselves.
Commissioner Hillis.
I didn't watch the board hearing when this was up at the board originally, but what was their reason for taking it out of?
It was never in. So it was a recommendation that the department came up with, and the sponsor of the ordinance, Supervisor Chu, decided not to put it in.
Okay. They debated it, though, at the time?
Yes, they did. I was on vacation.
Okay. I mean, this is one where I think Mr. Owen's point is more valid than on the registration number. I think people could potentially migrate to like a VRBO or have both, and if you can, book it under VRBO, because you don't start counting the days then, because I don't think they know.
Right.
Commissioner Moore.
Could the city impose a self-reporting requirement based on the fact that at the end of the year you're going to be paying your taxes based on the number of how much you rented?
Deputy City Attorney Marlena Byrne, there is a reporting requirement in the existing code that applies to the hosts. So on a yearly basis, anyone who is registered as a short-term rental has to file a report with the planning department providing this information. The planning department can also request it at any time from any host. This would be an additional reporting requirement that is on the hosting platform, not the host itself.
Commissioner Moore.
I already said that.
Sorry.
Richards.
So the question I have then is, if we impose a 10 or 20-day cap, which we actually already voted on 4-3 as a yes, we're relying on the host to actually come back and say, I've hit 120. We're not asking the hosting platform to say, hey, even though we have the data, we aren't going to require it of you. So I went online before and I found a rental I wanted on Airbnb, and I said book info. I saw a calendar came up and it said it's available this day, and this day. Every other day was shaded out. My question back to I think the zoning administrator was, how do you know what those gray days are? Whether those were already reached your 120 days and we're at 150 by the time I start clicking in the days I wanted. That's my concern. And I know it's inconsistent based on data platforms, but it comes back to kind of even having the number, we're still going to have a struggle with understanding when we hit the cap. It's a start, but it's an incomplete start. I come back to Supervisor Farrell. He said, unequivocally, we want to create, without a doubt, enforceability, without a doubt. And there's a doubt in my mind that we still have an enforcement issue without something like this.
Commissioner Antonini.
Yeah, well, ultimately, it's up to the host to report every year, and they can be, we'll have to report honestly. It's a lot like the tax reporting analogy we used before because, they are obliged under penalty to report accurately what the number of nights they rented the unit, and there is a limit, or there will be a limit that they will have. So, again, we have to find a way to do it, because even if Airbnb, for instance, reports 90 days, and then they go to somebody else and grab another 90 from Craigslist and another 90 from somebody else, we're really not going to know. And ultimately, the host is going to be the one that's going to have to say. So I'm against it. We're supposed to vote no on this, or, I mean, the way you've got it phrased is to vote.
Do not require this.
Do not, so therefore we're voting yes on do not.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Wu.
I agree with Commissioner Richards' thoughts. For enforceability, I think you really need this type of data. I don't see how you can talk about the cap otherwise.
Commissioner Hillis.
Can you remind me what the hosts have to report? So annually, they need to send a report to the planning department and kind of signed under oath. Do they have to report number of days?
Yeah, number of days.
Yeah. I mean, I think the 120 days, whether this is in or not, is everything's, we're trying to achieve this, everything's enforceable. It's not, just like most of the planning code is not. I mean, it's going to take work to enforce it on any of this.
Commissioner Moore.
There is technology available which by itself tracks how many rooms are rented or that a room is not available, and if you set the meter to stop after 120 days or whatever the days are, there is just no more room to rent. That technology is available. It does not have to be necessarily would be worked on by the platform itself, but there is a counting mechanism built in online reservations of anything.
Commissioner Richards.
I think Commissioner Antonini's point worries me or resonates with me around, I'm on Airbnb for the first 120 days. The next 120 days I'm on VRBO. The next 120 days, all of a sudden I have a 360-day rental. And it kind of worries me to death that, we've got a little bit of enforcement, but there's a big keyhole we can squeeze the pig through,
Commissioners, shall I call the question on recommendation number 11? So on that recommendation to not require platforms to report quarterly, Commissioner Antonini.
Aye.
Commissioner Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Aye.
Commissioner Moore.
No.
Commissioner Richards.
No.
Commissioner Wu.
No.
And Commission President Fong.
Aye.
That motion will be forwarded as a recommendation with a vote of 4-3 with Commissioners Moore, Richards, and Wu voting against.